Workshop, and welcome everybody to our third budget workshop. We've done public safety, we've done public works, and we're going to do public services tonight, I understand. And let's see, Councilor Robertson, Councilor Wingard, Councilor Mitchell, Councilor Gardner, Councilor Grenier, and Councilor Osher are all here. Councilor Osher let me know that she has a legislative meeting at 6 o'clock. So when she disappears from the screen, you'll know why. And Sophie, let's get started.
Okay, thank you. So tonight we're going to talk about public services. It's interesting, we don't do anything private around here, only public. With public services, we're really talking about community development, the public library, and parks and recreation. So I actually have 3 different presentations tonight. Hopefully we'll be able to run through them fairly quickly. My hope is that we're not doing the bulk of the talking, but rather answering questions and supporting your discussion. So community development has a budget of approximately $1.16 million. That includes assessing services, planning, code enforcement, and economic development. And you'll notice that economic development is in a different color. I used gold today. We use green for Joe with the enterprise fund. We're going to use gold for Dave and Mitch today because it's funded through TIF development funds. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to that part of the budget. I'm assuming you guys can see the presentation. Okay. So we start with assessing services, and that budget is $136,000. It's up $950 or 0.7%. So when we talk about assessing services, while it is critical to the town, the primary job of the town assessor is to create the value for each individual property as well as the general value for the community, which is how we ensure equity in taxation. It's a mandatory service that the town is required to provide, whether we contract or we hire. Right now, we are without an assessor. We have a per diem assessor. The former assessor is helping us out as needed. So personnel costs for our 1 full-time assessor and 0.2 full-time equivalent hours of administrative support are $122,000, almost $123,000. The personnel costs are up about $5,300 or 4.6%. Which are attributable to market wage adjustments for both the administrative assistant and the assessor. I will tell you, Dave Filan, Mitch, and I are working very hard to try to bring in an assessor, but they are very hard to come by. We have memberships and licensing. The major piece of licensing in this department is the software that we maintain, the database of all values. That is up $165 or 2.7%. And our equipment, supplies, postage is a big piece of that, is up $300 or 25%. Professional services, we use, there's a small line of about $5,000 in that budget that is used for assistance for the assessor if they run into issues and they need to reach out to somebody who has some expertise. We have that in there. We also have the ability for us to use the Registry of Deeds, which is the $600 in that budget line. And that is the same as it was last year. So that is assessing. I'm going fast tonight, folks, unless you have questions. So you want me to continue or questions about assessing? Okay. Then we're going to go on to planning. So before I need to back up, because one of the things I need to explain is that community development is all put together and they share staffing in and out of the Office of Economic Development. So the Office of Economic Development is not funded through general fund taxes. It's through tax increment finance program development funds instead. So what we do is we look at our workload on an annual basis, and those items on our workload that Dave and Mitch and I can reasonably, with a straight face, classify as economic development, we attribute those to the staff person who is doing them, and we allocate a portion of those wages into the TIF. So when you see planning services at $88,000, understand we're funding 2 people who are working in planning, but you will notice that we're funding half of our planner and a 0.3 FTE of our administrative assistant out of planning. Have I confused anybody yet? No? Okay. So our personnel costs are $71,625. They are up almost $3,000. A significant piece of that has to do with a market adjustment for the town planner that is in this budget. Our equipment and supplies, that's everything that he would need from the postage to send out notices to the legal assistance, and there is a small amount of money in this budget for office equipment and advertising and outreach, which would be the notices that have to go in the paper when we do, for example, when we do ordinance revisions and things like that. He also has a small budget that has not changed over last year for professional services. We use them, those funds are for legal services. So when we do, a good example would be when the Edge came in and wanted to move forward with their development at the last minute, and we had questions about whether or not they truly had the right to move forward. We used the planning legal line to reach out and get information from the town attorney. We also have a little bit of money in there for him to get assistance around comp plan implementation and mapping services if there's something that goes beyond what our GIS system can do, which has come in handy in the past. That is planning. Questions or concerns about planning?
Any questions from council? Looks pretty straightforward.
I like it. We're going fast. Code enforcement, we've got some changes. So the code enforcement budget's $118,000 a year. You will see, like most town departments, the bulk of that budget lives in personnel. We are funding a full-time code officer and 5 hours a week of a administrative assistant to support him. This is the department that's going to process all of the building permits, do all of the inspection of construction sites, deal with our compliance with our MS4 permit in terms of not necessarily the internal town operations, but the external activities that happen, respond to complaints, and support our development and permitting process. Our personnel costs are up about $13,000 this year. And part of that is, I guess you could call it a market adjustment, but when we went out to find a code officer, like an assessor, they do not grow on trees. And when we found somebody who had the degree of experience that we were comfortable with in Orono, we found that we needed to pay more than we paid our person who had been here for several years and retired, which I think I think that can tend to happen when you have turnover in an organization. So part of that is just paying for a new individual, and the other part is that very small number of hours that the administrative assistant works and her increase. We are actually down in our membership dues and software. I don't know if folks will recall, but last year Dave and I came to you with a pitch to buy some new software for code enforcement. And the first year was significantly more than we had expected by about $4,000. And then it dropped down into just a licensing cost. So we are showing almost all of that savings through the budget. The vehicle expense has not changed this year, but it assumes that we are going to enter into a lease for an electric vehicle for our code officer. That lease is a 3-year lease that costs $300 at the end of the lease term. We're still working with folks to bring that get that to a point where we can bring it to council, because it would involve signing a lease agreement and accepting a grant, because it's through Efficiency Maine. The current code car is well beyond its useful life. It was a passed down police cruiser that has had that job for several years. Our professional services line is up 215% or $8,800. And that is attributable 100% to our agreement with the city of Old Town to train our current code officer to be able to do electrical inspections. I think council will recall that we had that conversation. That's $7,000 a year. We are hoping, and what I'm hearing from Dave is that it looks like this will be a 1-year expense, that the training is really paying off and people are quite comfortable with where we're headed on that. The other $1,875 is for legal fees. So what we're finding is that our population is more engaged, and it's great to have a more engaged population, but they're also paying attention to what's happening. So we're getting appeals of code enforcement permit decisions. So that has cost us more 2 years in a row. So we're just gonna put a little bit of money there so that we're not running into the red quite so much. Questions about code? Yes.
I'm going to slow you down, Sophie. It's not really a question. I was just in the narrative. It said that Orono is the only community out of the 20 that it's still on a paper system, and that we're transitioning into our internet or into our online system.
So I think you will find that we are more than transitioning. I think we're almost there. I think these narratives were not made at the last minute, so they were they're a little lagging. But looking now, all of our current activity is electronic. All of our old is still in paper form. We just don't have the staffing right now to be able to go backwards, but we are moving forward. It's all electronic.
Yeah, that was I was just a little surprised, but that's okay. I get it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions on code? Don't see any.
All right. We might be out of here in time to have an ice cream. Economic development. The economic development budget is $819,000. It's actually down about $56,000 or 6%. When you look at that budget, it is funded 100% through tax increment financing development program dollars. So these are the sheltered dollars that we go through a council process to develop a program. that is then approved by the state that very strictly regulates how those dollars can be spent. So if you cut money out of this budget, you are saving money in the development program. So, I mean, a dollar spent today is a dollar that you don't have, but it doesn't may have a direct impact on the tax rate. Am I making sense?
Yep.
Okay. So our personnel costs are up about $5,500 or 1.45%. Those personnel costs, Dave Mylan gets all worried every year that everybody's going to think he makes $384,000, and he does not. That actually funds a full-time economic development director and almost the equivalent of almost 3 full-time positions performing all economic development functions, whether it's administrative support, so helping Dave, marketing, financial or executive support. So all of my reporting and paying TIF bills and dealing with credit enhancement agreements, all of that gets paid out of this fund, but also the functional and logistical support. So one of our arguments is that community events create not only a pride of place, which is a wonderful thing, but also draws people into our community to hopefully spend some time in our businesses. So when we put on a community event, there are elements of that that are clearly economic development related. Those are what we mean by logistical and functional support for the TIF.
Sophie,
Yes.
in the personnel costs, are there any other full-time salaries other than the director?
So they are all pieces of a full-time position.
Right,
So
I understand that.
But nobody at 100%. So you've got the planner at 50%. You've got the Parks and Rec coordinator at I think it's at 8 hours a week right now. You've got me in there for, I think it's 10 hours a week. Belle, because of all of her fiber expansion work that she's doing, I think she's at 15 hours a week. So it's that kind of an effort. We really do try to look at the work plan just in case we get audited. We want to be able to have a strong foundation for how we spent the funds.
Absolutely.
Our membership dues, software licensing, and supplies are down about $1,500 to or 7.7%. That next line is all of our professional services, our events, both for businesses in the community and our business support would come out of the services, events, and support line. And that's down about $1,100 or 2.6%. The TIFs fund eligible debt. There are 2 components of debt that we're repaying right now. One is for the public-private partnership that we did with the University Credit Union that resulted in our beautiful retaining wall and parking lots. The other is for the rehab of the Pine Street parking lot. And both of those are funded completely out of the tax increment financing districts. We have credit enhancement agreements. Those are agreements that come before council where an individual has made an argument that but for a tax break, a future tax break, they wouldn't be able to make the investment that they are looking to make. We have 2 different types of credit enhancement agreements right now. We have ones that are very much specific to a business and business enterprise. And we have a general credit enhancement agreement program for the downtown and transit oriented TIF district that is based on trying to get individuals to make improvements to their physical building, to the buildings. And if they make a certain level of improvement to the building that increases the value to a minimum level, we will then give them a 50% tax break on that improvement, not the whole tax bill, but just that increment for 10 years. That each one of those, even though it's a program, each one of those come to council and council vets them and makes the decision. When we're talking about the budget and credit enhancement agreements, those are estimates that are in the budget. The credit enhancement agreement is going to be based on the taxes that the business has to pay next year. The taxes are going to be based on their value, but also what the tax rate is. So if our tax rate goes down, we're going to collect less dollars. If our tax rate goes up, we collect more dollars. Same with their value. So when you adopt the budget, you also adopt an order that gives me the authority to adjust the credit enhancement agreement expense budget to reflect the actual committed value and credit enhancement agreement that we have to pay. The Black Bear Express is our local transits, our shuttle bus. That's actually about 50% of the cost. You will notice that it is up almost $10,000 or 10% due to the fact that last year, the city of Bangor, who operates the bus, so we contract with the city of Bangor for the shuttle, they received CARES Act funding for public transit and decided that the way to most fairly apply that was to make it a credit in the following year. So the budget that you see this year is artificially reduced because of that additional funding source. We, on the revenue side with the Black Bear Express, we get $4,000 a year payment that the university and the town split equally from Orchard Trails, and we have for a very long time. Actually, wait, I'm sorry, we're up to 6,000 there. And we get another amount of money from the Avenue. We got the Avenue to drop their bus, and so they bought onto this and are giving us a little bit of revenue. So if we were to cut the Black Bear Express, we would cut that expense, but we would also have a small amount of offsetting revenue that would also have to get cut. So questions thus far? I've just thrown a lot at you.
Yep.
Sophie, can you explain where the other 50% of the Black Bear Express costs are?
Yeah, so the city of Bangor actually charges closer to $208,000 for the service. We actually hold separate agreements, the university and the town, for that service. So they get a bill for $104,667 that they will pay, and we'll pay our half to the university, to the city of Bangor. Does that make sense?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Were there some adjustments in the schedule made during this pandemic year? And does this cost reflect going back to the previous schedule?
So I can speak to that, but I will tell you, Belle and Terry Grenier have been more involved in that than I have been. I can tell you at the high level that yes, and yes. Yes, there were changes made, and yes, this reflects going back to our regular service level.
Okay.
Yes, okay. All right. Because what I have for discussion items is, from staff's perspective, we're looking to continue services, economic development services as we have. We do have an outstanding abatement on the powerhouse, which funds a significant piece of this TIF. If the abatement were fully granted, it would be about a $250,000 repayment. I, at this point, am not comfortable. I certainly wouldn't add more to this budget. We have enough in the reserves to cover an abatement amount. But if that if we were to have to take all of the funds back, which is not what I'm hearing right now, we would have to come back to the table and reconfigure this budget. That was kind of my approach, as opposed to taking everything out of it now. We had one counselor in the pre-budget survey that was interested in talking about expanding staff roles to include an individual who would focus on housing, court developers interested in creating workforce housing, and provide some outreach or technical assistance for homeowners related to making homes more energy efficient and climate resilient. So I don't know if anybody wants to talk about that.
Is there any time currently available in our economic development team to do any of the courting of developers? Are we doing any of that now?
So I would argue that we are doing that now. I don't have an individual that has the job title or that works 40 hours a week doing it. The community development team is pretty busy. I think if you wanted a greater focus on that, we would need to think about what we want to take off the plate, and have a bigger discussion about that.
So if we were to decide we wanted to have someone who did this, and we didn't want to take any of the things off the plate of the people who have been already working diligently doing so many jobs in our town, how much would it cost to add someone who does this? Because I know that I've had people approach me and with interest and not know how to begin, and then I defer them to the staff, and I hear back that they don't get information back, or that they don't feel like they're being nurtured. So I just say we have great people and they're doing the best they can. So if this is a goal of our town, at the candidate forum, all the candidates were saying how much they cared about affordable housing. And if any of you, I look regularly on the for sale, and there's so few houses even for sale in Orono that it would be great to have someone who's focusing on how we're going to get more housing here, and also more affordable housing. So what would the cost be to do that? Could we?
If I was looking at so I don't know exactly the type of person or the credentials we'd be looking at. A higher functioning entry level position, as a rule of thumb, we would say by the time benefits are in and you've given them a space to be, you're looking at $65,000 to $75,000. And if you wanted somebody who was experienced and really knew what they were doing or had specific technical expertise, you'd be looking at more than that. I am not sure. I think we probably could get some of the Webster Point funds available to do this. It's not enough to pay a person though. We end up with $10,000 to $12,000 a year, I think, by the time we take our piece of the taxes.
So can you explain a little bit about I don't remember, sorry, about what the Webster Point funds are?
So we have multiple TIFs. We have Webster Point, we have the Penobscot Valley Dermatology, we've got the Downtown Transit Oriented TIF District, we've got the Tech Park, and Orono Brewing Company, which is the Orono Basin TIF district. So we've got 5, unless of course Dave's going to tell me I've skipped one. Each one of those has a unique program, development program, and allows for different things. The Downtown Transit Oriented TIF district is clearly our largest one. It brings in the lion's share of our expenses, of our TIF revenue. it allows for a breadth of economic development work and transit work. So traffic planning, that's why we can do so much of the traffic planning out of those TIF funds for the corridor that goes through the TIF. The Webster Point is Webster Point. It's the old Stryer's Mill site. And that is an affordable housing TIF district. And I think it's interesting. I was just talking to Dave about this last week, that we had an opportunity with that. They are required to sell affordable housing as defined by Main State Housing, which I want to say was in like the $175,000 to $200,000 range. They started out as condos, could not sell them. They then went to attached homes, and a year and a half ago, decided that they couldn't make that work and have sold the rest of the land, or let the rest of the land go back to the development, so it can't be developed in the future. So they could not sell those affordable housing units, new, I think fairly nice units. So I think before we wanted to expend a lot of resources behind hiring people, I think we'd want to really clarify what we were looking for and how to make that happen.
Mm.
Thank you. So those extra lots that they didn't build on, so they sold all the ones that they built, is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the lots that they didn't build on, those cannot be built on it anymore?
No, they got absorbed into the way they created that condo, legally created the condo, when they walked away from it. So they gave up all their development rights and they just moved in. It's now open space for the rest of the development. So under the current permitting and structure, they can't be, they can't add. Laura keeps raising
that
her
an
hand,
agreement?
Tom. I don't know if you can see her.
I do not see her on my screen. Laura?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that housing is an extremely important issue, and I had talked to Sophie and I had mentioned it, I think, in the survey as well. But I think our focus right now should be, in the area that we could have the most vast impact around, is around rental regulation and improving and expanding the stock that we have, and increasing the value of that stock. So I guess that's, and that apparently is going to take an investment. And so I would prioritize there, because I think we have the opportunity to change the policy around that, and then invest in implementing that policy. And a part of that, ultimately could include some energy efficiency pieces. I don't know. I haven't thought about that, but I think what Kyle had in front of us and the opportunities that we had to really change and impact our community is going to come out of the rental regulation, because it's 50% of our housing stock.
So you're suggesting that we put money aside that would be available for either low interest loans or grants for people to improve the rental housing?
No, I guess it was my understanding that right now, over the short term, we need to focus on the policy that's going to enable us to then start implementing something out of code enforcement, but that might not be until next summer. And so I would think it would be in code enforcement that we would want to plan some investments for 2022. That's slower than I would like, but we need to be focused and aligned on the policy first. But I think that's the hugest opportunity when you go around town and look at our property and the number of properties that are rentals and the quality and valuation of those properties. And we heard from a whole neighborhood in an email about that. And I think that we need to pay attention and take action in the way that we can, which is policy right now, and then start putting some dollars behind it with staff.
I can speak to the weatherization part too, is because that's something that we're working on in committee. And when those opportunities come up, those will definitely be brought to committee and council. So we're keeping an eye on opportunities through Efficiency Maine or whatever comes out of this legislative session. And that's a crucial part of the climate action plan as well. So we're keeping an eye on that.
Any other comments on this topic? Okay, guess we're ready to move on, Sophie.
All right, are you seeing?
Library.
Yeah. So, here we go. And Lori is gonna just jump in if I go astray. So before we start talking about the dollars and the cents, I just want to remind folks that not only is Orono Public Library an amazing place to visit and unique in so many ways, but I think it's awful easy for us to get really focused on the building and the books. And our library is so much more than that, which I think is why it was so heavily impacted by the pandemic. It's hard to bring community together when people can't come together. But I think what you're going to see, or hopefully did see as you went through the budget, is that Lori and her team did a great job at trying to shift very quickly and create some new platforms and some new services that we didn't have before. So when we think about the library, it's more than books. It's really about inspiring our community. It really drives to the vision, I think, of and values of Orono. And it's one of those things, and you'll hear me say it again with Parks and Rec, it helps create pride of place. And I think that is a huge piece to people's interest and desire to be in Orono and active in Orono. So the library budget is $370,000. You're going to notice this is different than what got published in your report. And a lot of that has to do with, we have some staff turnover, which allowed Lori to really think about how to configure her hours. And when we started talking to people that would fill those hours, it became clear that we had some folks that wanted to work less hours and some folks that wanted to work more hours, which means we were able to take some benefits out of the budget because the individual only wanted to work 16 hours a week, which does not rise to the level of getting benefits. You have to be at 20 hours to do that. So that $370,000, this is for library operations and what happens inside the building. The building itself is funded through the facilities budget. So that $370,000 is funding 4.5 full-time equivalent positions. It restores 0.7 FTE that were taken out of the budget last year, that was not funded last year. I think Lori and I would call this a transitional year that we're embarking on. I don't think it's flip a switch and we go back to business as usual. Lori has been really good sharing some of her professional, what she's receiving for professional guidance. And it's telling us that library patrons really are going to fall into one of two categories. There will be some that want to race right back to the library and use it the way it has always been used. Then there will be others that are really going to be kind of carefully stepping back into service. And they called it a hybrid. And what they suggest is that we look at how we can meet the needs of everybody. With 4.5 full-time equivalent people, it's really hard to meet everybody's need, though. So there are some things that won't be able to happen, but other things that we will be able to do. So we're looking at a year of walking into restoring service. Tomorrow, the library opens to the public. Lori, I think, is really excited about that. I think she was really excited that she got to be on TV. So she's doing a lot of planning for in-person services, but we're also looking to continue digital services, which took some of the places that we had cut and expanded the cost just a little bit. So that $370,100 represents an increase of $56,590 or 17% in the library budget. To give you a sense, I thought Lori could speak to this slide just to give them a sense of.
So we, when we closed for the pandemic, we increased our digital services, including the RB Digital licenses, as well as a Canopy, which is a service for streaming films, which we added in December of 2020. So this just shows the increase from July of 2019. So we had RB Digital back then, and you can see how the use increased tremendously once March, April, May of 2020 hit. People definitely appreciated this service, and I can see where it will continue now that they're used to it, now that they know that they have access to it. So I believe it's a very important service to continue. Happy to answer any questions. And this shows Cloud Library, which is a downloadable audio and ebook service that we have gotten for years through Main Infonet. We pay an annual fee to be a member of this program. One thing that we hear from patrons quite often is that it's a great service, but the titles, just like in a library, if someone's reading it, even though it's digital, you still have to wait your turn to get it. So there, for bestsellers and whatnot, there's often a long list of people waiting for particular titles. So I decided back in April to go ahead and start purchasing a proprietary collection for the Orono Library. And what that does is it allows Orono patrons to have first dibs on those titles. So it's not a huge collection. It's slightly over, I think, 150 titles. What people may not realize is you can buy a digital ebook on Amazon for $8.99 and put it on your own personal device. But for a library to own it, it's oftentimes $30 or more for a title. And for a hot title, one that everybody's waiting for, it can be close to $100. So publishers are anticipating that more people are going to use it. So that's the reason why we don't have a huge collection, but we're slowly building it. That too, as you can see, the blue bars are from 2019 to 20, and then 2020-21 are the red bars, and you can see that also grew tremendously. And I think as people found different ways to access our services, they're going to continue using them. They'll also come back and get paper copies of books. That's never going away, but I think that patrons are realizing that there are other ways of accessing our services.
So let's look at the budget. Our personnel costs of that $370,000, $310,090 of that is attributable to personnel. So this is an increase overall of $43,670 or 16%. $36,000 is directly related to restoring that part-time position. $3,500 is related to restoring training and conferences. So the conference line in there is actually a contractual obligation that we have with the library director as part of her employment contract. Every other year, we we send her to conferences, and we did not budget last year to do that. We have membership dues and licensing for many of the things that Lori has already spoken to. That's actually down $1,500 or 19%. Our supplies in the library, I don't know how our telephone, our VoIP telephone system for the library ends up as a supply, but it does. That
Actually, I think
is,
that's separate, Sophie.
no,
think
I
it is
got it as
separate.
supplies, office supplies, and
Oh, do you?
postage.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Okay.
there's no
Oh,
change.
sorry. Got it.
Materials would be books, magazines, videos, audio, digital content, programming, and music. That's an increase of $2,700. It's attributable in large part to the increase in digital services, but Lori did offset some of that increase by dialing back the budget for videos. We're not seeing the need for the hard copy, I don't know, is a video a hard copy? But what you can tangible, what you can touch and feel. Our equipment and our furnishings are up $1,200 or 31%. And I pushed Lori on this because I don't like to see big increases like doubling of a budget line. But man, she really has a lot of support for what she's asking for. When we invite people in, we're going to want people to be using self-checkout as much as they can for their comfort and for staff ability. And some other changes to help with the flow within the library. And it's going to take some furniture or some fixtures to kind of help make that happen and support that. And our interlibrary loan went up $95 or 5%. And my understanding is there's a limited amount of interlibrary loan that you can just get, but that we're paying for additional, which we seem to more than use.
Right. So there are days that are paid through the system, as well as there's a group Bangor area libraries that pay for a day. So we get 3 days paid out of 5. So we're paying for 2 days a week. I think our patrons are lucky that we get delivery every day. So books are going in and out of our library daily, but we're only paying for a fraction of them.
So questions about the budget? Okay. So this is me. FY21 was an incredibly unusual year. The service level in the library was just completely changed. And I think the library staff really rose to try to meet the need. I think they did a great job. We had to reimagine what we were going to do, partly because of the pandemic and partly because we cut a significant piece of staffing out of the budget to mitigate the impact to taxpayers last year. So restoring this staffing will allow us to return to a service level that is similar. I don't know if it's going to be identical. I think we will bring in new staff with new ideas, and Lori is, I think, doing a good job trying to evaluate what would make sense in terms of transitioning back into full services. But we need that. We need the staffing in order to be able to come back to a service level that reasonably approximates what the community has become accustomed to having. And I think Lori said the same thing a little bit differently, only nicer in this slide. It goes back for me to the conversations that we've had with council for years about the fact that council determines the service level, and it's our job to provide the service that you want. I think the concern, especially with the library, because it was hit so hard with our budget, our cost reduction measures, that the expectation will be for the services to bounce back without the resources to do that. So I think if we want to talk about what service level might look like, Lori is definitely here, and I know she's prepared to do that.
Happy to answer any questions.
Questions from council members? Laura?
Well, I heard two things. I heard you talk about thinking that things weren't going to bounce back, but us being prepared with staff for it to bounce back. I mean, do you think, can things operate for the first 6 months to kind of assess what the demand is like as things reopen? Or are you thinking that the demand is going to bounce right back?
I think we need to be prepared for whatever is going to happen. We really don't know. We're opening tomorrow. So we'll be open 3 hours a day for 4 days a week. That's not an awful lot. Maybe you all know that we'll be down 1.5 staff members as of this week. So things change very quickly. And I think we just need to be prepared to say, okay, people really want to come in, so we need to open the doors. And wow, we don't have to do children's programming outside. We really could do it inside, and we need to be ready for that. So we found ourselves stretched, even without the doors open. So I think that there's plenty to do, and it may not look the same, but we will be trying to deliver whatever service we can and meet community expectations. I don't think that it would be easy to do the first 6 months. I think that it will be easier if we can be fully staffed.
So Lori, I based on my own areas of expertise and information, I know that in the transition from full pandemic times to the beginning of opening, if you are owning a restaurant, say, and going from exclusive takeout to starting to have people back in your space, or you're a teacher who's navigating teaching students who are online as you're also teaching students in a classroom, I imagine that there's probably also going to be a lot of, in terms of being prepared and staff time and attention, it's probably going to be a little bit of a juggling act to navigate people coming back into the library with the expanded digital services and contact-free services that the library has been offering in the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about what those developed digital and contact-free services might do to increase or make more complicated the job of staff once people start returning?
Sure. So right now what we've decided to do is to not overlap the services, not overlap the contact-free versus the browsing services. So we're open in the morning for walk-up window, we're open in the afternoon for browsing, and we still have the after-hours blockers. So that's how we've chosen to deal with that right now. When we see how many people are using the browsing services versus are no longer using the walk-up window, then we'll be able to balance that a little bit better. The digital services kind of do themselves right now. There's some background work that needs to get done, but once it's done, right now the the RB digital services are switching over to Overdrive. So there's some background work that needs to be done there. But the digital services pretty much do themselves, except for collection development. If I'm adding more items to the cloud library, that's part of what I do is develop all collections, including the digital. So as we rehire for youth services, hopefully that eases things up a bit, and we maybe can do some overlap. And then if we can get that other part-time person back, it will also look different. Did that answer enough for you?
Yes, well, yeah, so I suspected as much, but you're kind of operating in like a triage mode now to figure out how to offer all the services as people want them, but being able to staff that position back would increase the ability for those services to potentially overlap.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sure.
Tom, you're on mute.
Of course. So any other questions for Lori?
Thanks.
Guess not.
I guess I'll just say thank you for what you're doing, and I was amazed you were able to do so much, you know, having to retool, use new systems, figure out ways to address the COVID precautions and do it with less staff. So I'm supportive of increasing your staff back to what staff you had last year,
Thank you.
so that you can juggle all these things with the whole staff.
Thanks.
Okay, so Sophie, I guess we're ready to move on.
Okay, before I jump into Parks and Recreation, I just want to remind counselors that we are getting ready to go through a transition in Parks and Rec. Dave Mylan, who is the Economic Development Director, is retiring at the end of next month. Mitch is going to move over to Economic Development, which is why you see Megan Mazzilla, because Megan's going to become our Parks and Rec manager. And we are currently advertising for an anticipated vacancy for a Parks and Rec programmer who would fill her seat. So there's some transition happening, which is why you're seeing so many faces, and also why things are a little bit in motion in the budget. And everybody sees the Parks and Rec? Okay. So I think it's important just to briefly go over what Parks and Rec does. So Parks and Rec is responsible for all of our parks, our trails, and our open spaces. Public Works, Public Works supports the general maintenance of parks, so the mowing and the taking care of parks, but that overlaps quite a bit. If there are recreation elements, then Parks and Rec is working with Public Works on those items. They're also responsible for our recreation facilities. So our fields, the baseball fields, the open fields, the ice rink, the boat landings, the launch, Brownies Beach, the pool, just to kind of give you a sense of kind of their responsibility. They also are responsible for programming. So that would be recreation programming and community events. So we have a community events team, but Parks and Rec plays a significant role in that. In fact, I think right now, Lori and Megan are co-chairs of that team. Yes, there we go. So we talk about resources. We have 2 full-time employees. Half of the rec manager's time is attributed to economic development. And that is because part of our economic development plan relies heavily on ecotourism and our trails. So over the last year, Mitch has spent a lot of time, 2 years, spent a lot of time working regionally to try to capitalize on our trails. So we would assume that Megan would follow that work. We have collaborative partnerships. Regional rec programs are all working together. We have our relationship with the University of Maine and adult education. We also have some community partners, including RSU 26. We also have contracts for services. So people who provide services to us under contract and volunteers. So our budget for 2022 is $207,825. $150,750 of that is Parks and Recreation. $57.75 is the pool. So the total budget is up $73,850 or 55%. One of the things you're going to see is that when we were looking at trying to mitigate the expense budget last year, Parks and Rec took a pretty significant hit in the budget in order to make that happen. Parks and Recreation is up $34,000 or 29%, and the municipal pool is up $39,850 or 231%. We did not open the pool last year, so there were some expenses in the budget related to opening the pool this year, and some things that we had to do just to manage the facility last year. I'm gonna wait. So when we think about our Parks and Rec budget, we are actually adding 10 hours a week back in. So Mitch was funded more out of the TIF. He was funded 30 hours a week out of the TIF and 10 hours a week in the Parks and Rec budget. This assumes Megan, actually it assumes a 20-20 split. It also assumes that we are going to continue the UMaine contract to provide youth sports. And that budget is up $18,200. Our membership dues and licensing, software licensing, no change. Our supplies and equipment is up $450, which really is looking at reallocating a cell phone expense to Parks and Recreation and continuing this year the hotspot that we bought last year. It's just we're finding that to be very valuable for programming. Maintenance is up $8,350 or 96%. And it is almost all attributable to restoring cuts made in FY21 for building maintenance, trail maintenance, ice rink operations, and Gould's Landing. There is no charge to contractor services, but just in case you're following along at home, it's credit card fees and portable toilets. And program support is up $7,000 or 33%, all attributable to restoring program funding that was cut in FY21. Questions about Parks and Rec thus far?
Laura?
Is there any documentation or kind of clarity around what programming like this is going to now provide?
So what this restores, and I would allow, I mean, not allow, I would welcome folks to pop in, but when we talk about what this restores, it restores, for example, our ability to maintain trails without digging into our trail reserve. And it allows us to bring back a level of youth sports programming that we didn't have last year. I think I want you to hold that. I want you to hold that question because there's more here that I think will feed into that. If that's all right, Laura.
Okay.
Ready to continue? Oh, Jeff.
Thanks. Can you, at some point, and maybe it's more appropriate on a later slide, talk about the value that we receive from the UMaine partnership and what would be the adjustment we would have to make to our program if we try to provide those services in-house without that partnership?
Do you want to take that or do you want me to take a a crack at it?
I can start, and anybody that wants to chime in. The UMaine partnership, as it pertains to the youth sports, really gives us the opportunity to have operational help where it comes down to people at our events, at our practices. Also, having the ability to tap into a resource there with coaching expertise that can help support our volunteers in when it comes to, like, volunteer parents that are coaching. We've been able to get experts in their field, or kids that are studying to do that, to come and help those parents out. The other thing, it really extends our bench in that to be at everything all the time. I often say that Parks and Rec is almost like a 24-hour-a-day operation, because you have trails, you have all this stuff that people are doing all the time, and frankly, impossible to be everywhere all the time. So trying to figure out ways in which we could to add to that. And I think ultimately what it does is it gives us the opportunity to have really more than another person for a fraction of the cost to help us with that operational piece. I don't know if Sophie, you want to add to that, or Megan?
I can add a little bit to that as well. Speaking to the coaching piece, just in this past year, because of the regulations we had to follow due to COVID, we would not have been able to put everybody on a soccer team. But because we were able to reach into the university and get an additional coach who had previous coaching experience, we were able to open up more slots and more space so that all kids could have a spot on a team this year. So they step in where they're needed and to support us, and we do really see that as a large value to the sports programs there.
Thank you. And can you maybe explain a little bit how this relates to after-school programming? And
So, oh, go ahead.
We have offered some after-school programming in the past. They are structured programs. It's not an after-school pool of kids that are there hanging out. They do have specific activities and structured activities they would be doing. We've had access to swimming lessons with the indoor pool in the past, as well as the use of the rock climbing wall that the university has in their main bound center. So those are pretty unique experiences to give kids there as a structured program.
So Megan, you've got an issue with your microphone, or I've got an issue, one of the two.
It's her microphone. We've had it replaced. Apparently we need to do more.
Okay. So I'm probably going to dive deeper into your question than you meant, Jeff, but after school is a perennial discussion, has been since I arrived in Orono. And when I arrived in Orono, we had an after school program. We expended about $50,000 a year on it, and we took in closer to $25,000 a year to fund it. It wasn't even the money that caught my attention when I first got here. It was the complaints that I was getting, because we were having it in the basement of the Keith Anderson house, and it was a lot more like daycare than Parks and Rec after school programming. And if you're going to run a daycare, you've got to be licensed as a daycare. And so we have gone through the mill of trying to figure out how to make an after school program work. We tried to get into the school, and that was not something that the school at that time was interested in supporting. We went to the university so that we could get indoor space where kids could run around and do more rec activities. When we were paying $500 a week to rent the space, it meant that you needed to have, I think the number was 17 kids to make it break even. And we were averaging between 6 and 8. So we came back and council made a decision at that point to not do after school and to instead promote Old Town Recs after school program and the Orono Old Town YMCA, who both provide transportation here to pick up kids and take them back. I get that there is a voice in the community that would very much like after school. The problem is when we do surveys, we will get results that are very heavily, we need after school. And then when we ask if they'll put their kid in after school, the answer is they only need it 2 days a week, or they don't, or they won't. I think the way that you make it work is to make it more cost effective. The way we need to be able to make it, got to make it more reasonable to access and more cost effective. And that means we need space, whether it's we can get into the school before and after school, or if it's something else. I would argue, I'm not arguing, I would suggest that if we were going to move forward with an after school program, we would want to staff it with part-timers. And so we would essentially have one of our full-time people that could oversee it, and then staff it with part-time folks in the hopes that you try to get as close to breaking even as you can with the part-time folks. I have heard through the grapevine, and maybe Mitch can enlighten us all, but I've heard through the grapevine that the state is kind of tightening up on Parks and Rec after school programs being more like daycare, and kind of pushing for some licensing there.
So I guess I can expand a little bit on that, is that throughout the state, there are, every Parks and Rec department does it a little different. Some are licensed, some are not. But what they found is those that are not and are acting as Parks and Rec after school programs, they are looking at to make sure that they're following those rules and those guidelines. If not, that they're licensed properly. And we've heard a couple of stories of people having to get licensure because how they were operating, they weren't operating as an after school program that was rec based. So.
Have we answered your question, Jeff?
Yeah, thank you. I think I really needed to hear that context again to understand all the different sort of developments and evolutions over time. So that was really helpful. Thanks.
And could I jump in just quickly too, is that when Sophie said space, a facility is really important. That's almost like the key. And I would also add that an after school program has to be flexible, because parents don't want to pay for 5 days a week when they're, 3 days out of that week, their kids are going horseback riding, or they're doing other activities, or they're taking an art class, or they're doing things like that. So flexibility, but the biggest issue in this town is space for the kids for after school. And I know that firsthand. So thank you.
Yeah, I think we really need to go back to the comment that Councilor Mitchell made maybe a month ago, when she proposed kind of a strategy session on our visioning for rec. But I appreciate the kind of nuts and bolts stuff we talked about tonight. I think it's really important to understand that.
All right, I'm going to go back then. Now, do you see my presentation again? I won't make you sit through this slide again, though. So the pool, we are estimating, when this budget was printed, we were estimating $44,000 for personnel costs. As you would expect, that's up $32,440. I haven't even done the percentages on these cost centers because they're all well over 100%, and some of them 200 and 300%. Supplies and minor equipment is up $1,500. Utilities are up $2,800. The maintenance to the building, so this is repair and maintenance to the building is up $1,900, and concessions are up $1,200. So let's talk about some pool concerns. First and foremost, we are still trying to work through identifying operating parameters. How are we gonna transition into this post-pandemic pool world? I traveled for a family birthday celebration this weekend and was flipping burgers with the gentleman who runs the pool in Fort Fairfield. And it's interesting. It could have been, I could have been talking to Mitch and Megan. The issues are really similar. I think indoors, there are some defined parameters when you look at what opening a pool looks like. There are CDC guidance, there's more Parks and Rec guidance, and they all say, you should do this, but then you should look over here at this. And so they kind of, you're circling around trying to figure out what the rule is supposed to be. So the bad news about the closing the pool was not only did we not get to enjoy it last year, but our long-term pool director who kept us on the straight and narrow decided, wow, it was kind of cool to have her summer off, and elected not to return. So when we were turning our attention to trying to find a pool director, we put something out and didn't get much response. And what we learned is that there is actually a regional shortage issue recruiting lifeguards and pool people for the summer. So even in Fort, they're dealing with the same thing, which was kind of interesting. So we actually reached out to the university because we know they have lifeguards, and they agreed that the idea of being able to rotate their lifeguards both inside on campus and outside here maybe made it a little bit more appealing as a job. We've got an initial contract drafted, and I received the budget for that effort. If we were going to limit people to limit occupancy to 25 people, it would take 3 lifeguards at a time who are open 62 hours a week. That leaves us needing about $4,000 more in the pool budget in order to fund a 12-week pool being open for 12 weeks. So I think we're going to have to kind of talk about kind of the priority with the pool and what council's looking to gain from this, and probably rework this budget a little bit. Even with the effort, and Bell and Mitch and the university have all been working at trying to blast the need for folks who are looking for summer jobs that are capable of being lifeguards, we are still having a hard time building a pool of applicants for these positions. So when we talk about the pool, I don't think it's just the budget that I need you to talk to me about. I need to understand the expectations and what council is looking for.
You take that slide down, Sophie, so I can see people, please. Yeah. Laura Mitchell.
I heard you say 25 people. Where did that number come from as far as being open for 25 people?
I'm gonna pass that one to Mitch because he's been negotiating.
So originally, when we started this discussion, it was prior to any of the changes to the CDC and the main guidance. I met with Rob St. Louis and Chief Lowe to discuss that. And Rob came, one of the issues that we run into is it's not about necessarily the whole facility and how big it is. It's really more about the pool, because that's where people are and you can't keep people apart. That number came from a calculation that Rob St. Louis had in his guidance with the stuff at the time. When we talk that through, the challenge that we're looking at is the number of lifeguards. One of the things that you don't know in a regular year is how many people will show up at a certain time. So you have to staff kind of to that higher level and try to figure out as we go through, and we've done it enough to understand where the busy times are, but you're always kind of caught sometimes where it's a nice day and everybody decides to go to the pool today. So when we looked at this originally, having the opportunity to set a number based on the CDC worked better because we could control that number of staff that we needed in a year that we were struggling to find staff. Like I said, since that conversation, and that was what the budget was built on, the CDC has changed some guidelines. I don't know if it affects, realistically, one of the challenges is they still talk about 6-foot social distancing, and that's where that number comes into play in the pool, not necessarily out on the deck, but in the pool. And so that's where that number came from.
Yeah, I guess we need to have kind of a more final answer about how many people are going to be allowed to get in before talking about budget and staffing. Because if we're talking about 25 people on a summer afternoon, like that's not a lot of people. And so I guess I have a hard time justifying that.
One of the
so I
plans,
need updated numbers.
Laura, one of the plans was it wasn't just there's 25 people allowed in the pool. We were looking at blocks of time so you could rotate people through. So 25 at a time, whether they're hour and a half blocks, and then new group would be able to come in. So it wouldn't just be for 25, for the day. Sorry, I'm in, and I don't nobody else that gets to come. And so we were trying to look at that as almost like not necessarily reserving a spot, but having those blocks of time set to allow more people to come.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not ideal. I certainly understand that and would love to have it wide open. I still think there's some challenges with because there's indoor space as well and controlling people the way, there's a lot of unknowns in that whole process. And so I think looking at that number and trying to figure out a way to get as many people in a day as possible, but restricting that number to make it work staff-wise was kind of how we looked at that, if that is clearer.
Mitch, have they talked at all about vaccinated, like lifeguards? Are they talking about those kinds of things at all at the state? At the regulatory level?
No.
Okay.
And I guess I would defer a little bit to Sophie, but I don't know that we could even require our lifeguards to be vaccinated. As far as employees are concerned, I'm not sure about that. Sophie, do you know about that?
Well, when
Yeah.
you require employees to be vaccinated, you run into ADA, Americans with Disability Act, and HIPAA issues. I know that schools appear to have some different abilities with that. If you look at the news, there are several colleges that are requiring all of their students to be vaccinated. I think the piece for me, I think part of what we run into is this is not FDA approved at this point, which makes it kind of gray area, and it's gray area that we have been warned to stay away from. I don't think we need to plan exactly what the pool is going to look like tonight, but I do need to get a sense of if we've got 3 lifeguards at a time, I need to add another $4,000 to this budget to make it work. If you're looking for more than that, then I'm going to have to come back with a bit of a different budget.
if I could. So yeah, I was curious about this, and I had looked at the CDC website for guidance on pools, and it doesn't look like it's been updated to include any information about vaccinated people and what they should or shouldn't be doing. So that I'm not sure about, in terms of this question of like, well, what number of people and how could we, I wish that we could have everybody be vaccinated by waving our magic wand, but I can see why we can't require municipal employees to be vaccinated. But I think that we're kind of, for me, the question of like, well, we need to know how many people are allowed to be in that space based on the guidance. I think that we could look at it the completely reverse way, which is we can determine how many people are allowed into that area based on the level that we're able to staff. So one of the things about the municipal pool, and I remember Tom Spitz telling me this in my first budget season, but it really is just, the epitome of like a community luxury. It is not sustainable financially for the town. It's a luxury to have a municipal pool. And I think it's a great thing to have a municipal pool, but it is not something that really pays big money into the town budget. It's something that the town pays for to offer a service to its community members. And last year we made the decision based on the health issue, but also the budget issue that it was not, a service that we could provide to the town at that time for those reasons. If, I'm not 100% sold on the idea that it's an item we can provide this year, but if we were going to provide some version of this service to the town, then it would probably have to be really modified from what people were used to in the pre-COVID times. And that might look like saying, we have a limit of only 25 people. I mean, treating it like restaurants were in Massachusetts. You had to sign up for a 90-minute block. That was your time that you could be there, and only X number of patrons could be in the restaurant during those 90-minute blocks. We can make up any rules that we want in order to sustain a level of staffing that we feel we can afford in this budget. So if we were to determine that the pool just couldn't happen this summer, I would be regretful, but I wouldn't fight too hard. If we can come up with some modified version where maybe it's not quite as accessible as it has been in a COVID free past, I think that we should make that decision.
The comment about 3 lifeguards is based on 25 people at the pool. That's a safety requirement, or that's our best thinking? Where does that number come from?
That's safety. We don't have less than 2 on at a time. So there are 3. You have 2 that are working and 1 that rotates out. So that's 3 at a time. The 25 number is the max. To 1 per 25 is what the Red Cross says. So you're right at that max to have another one. But we don't put only 1 lifeguard on a time. You also, if there's an emergency, you also have to have somebody that can call 911. There's a whole process to that as well. So that 3 number is based on that.
In the pre-COVID era, how many lifeguards did we have?
Well, it depended on the time of day. Sometimes we'd have up to 4 staffing based on the numbers of busy times. And 5 in there, you had 1 that would rotate out. We also, we had a director that was there on site at least probably 30 hours a week. So that was a lifeguard. We also had somebody that worked the front desk to bring people in, and was lifeguard trained. So if we kind of worked it so you had extra people there if you had to staff up to meet the demand, and it was kind of a balancing act.
Thank you, Mitch.
I think Jeff had I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks. Tom asked most of my questions anyway, but I did have a question about the shared staffing model with UMaine, and just seeing what level of comfort you have not having complete oversight over hiring and management of our staff.
Mitch, do you want to take this or you want me to?
You can start.
So I guess I would say that part of my level of comfort has to do with the fact that we are dealing directly with Christy Deschen, who is somebody that we've done a lot of our efforts with, and whenever we've had concerns, she addresses them as a team, even though they have the final say. We don't usually parse that out that way. If Christy was to leave and do something different, then I might not have the same level of comfort. But given our history, I have more comfort with that than I do with the pool director offerings that we had and struggling to find lifeguards who would likely, you want to mix. I mean, there's a place for 15, 16-year-old lifeguards, but not for your entire team to be young. You want a mix of some people with a little bit more life experience and lifeguarding experience. And that makes me very nervous. This is a high risk endeavor that we're in. And I feel better having somebody like Adriana, who works for Christy, ensuring that we're meeting the industry standards for safety and training, and that we're in a good place, because I can't do that. I don't know how to run a pool. I can manage one, I can't run it.
Thanks. At some point also, could you address the status of swimming lessons? And it doesn't look like this budget includes swimming lessons.
So swim lessons would normally, they were going to pay for themselves anyway. So that's an add-on that we can just add on to the budget. In the contract, it has swim lessons as to be determined, meaning if they can, they will. If the guidance says no, then they won't. And we really are, the issue for us right now is managing both the staffing perspective and the CDC perspective. I heard the concern that council had about the idea of just nixing all swim lessons. So the thought, they are, Adriana and Mitch and Megan are talking about how do we make that happen. But first we got to make sure we can open a pool before we get too worried about swim lessons.
Thank you very much.
Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately the pool, I feel like the pool needs to be open this summer. And I think we need to find out a way to make that happen. And if the pool's going to be open, I think we need to have swim lessons. It's not safe for kids not to know how to swim. And it's the lowest barrier option there is around to have it there. And so I can think of other places that I would prioritize below finding a way to have the pool open and sharpening up the CDC requirements around the numbers so we know how many lifeguards we might need. I mean, there was competitive swimming indoors this winter and lessons indoors this winter. So I'm confident that with these revised CDC guidelines that swim lessons can be offered outside. So that's just my perspective. I think it's been a long year for families, and I think people need this.
I agree with that. We need to find a way to open the pool.
Yeah. So if this is a larger conversation, which it feels like it's going to be a larger conversation, when can we have the numbers? Like when can we talk about this kind of exclusively about
So-
what we're gonna do.
So, from my perspective, I don't know that you're going to have them. I think the key here is if this is what you want, that I've got to go back and work to define, is 25 people for an hour at a time gonna work for council? That we can manage with 3 people. If you're gonna want to fill the pool to the max that the CDC allows, I'm gonna need to budget more, and it's gonna cost you more. In 2 ways. First is the minimum wage has gone up, which adjusts 2 years of an adjustment on the pay scale, but also labor is not easy to come by right now.
So Sophie, some years we have a compare and contrast kind of thing. Would it be difficult to put together what it might look like, best case scenario, and then what we might be able to swing or afford, or I don't know,
No.
I'm just trying to find a
No.
way to balance this, you know.
No,
what's
I can bring back a couple of options. I would be happy to bring back a couple of options.
if it's not too much.
Yeah, I
We'll
think
probably have to do that on Monday when we meet about general government, just set aside a little bit of time
Yep.
for this.
Thank you.
Are folks ready to move on? I mean, we're having actual, oh, Terry.
I just wanted to kind of, as council, we typically talk about being fiscally responsible. I have a question about the pool and that responsibility. We kind of, you know, I don't know how to better say that. We're always talking about being fiscally conservative, but yet this is not fiscally conservative by any means. Now, when you reference Fort Fairfield, I'm very familiar, obviously. They have similar issues, but what they ended up doing, and maybe this could be something to kind of help with the cost. I don't know if it's doable or not, but up there they have like agreements with the Parks and Recs, with Easton, with Limestone, even with Caribou now, that they pay a fee, they bus their kids over. It's probably not going to happen this year, obviously, but in the future to help pay for those types of services. I don't know if we already have other towns that are participating that way, but it would be a good thing for us to kind of reach out now to kind of like just have the conversation what it might look like in the future to help with those costs.
As I often do, you're right on the money. As I often say, you are absolutely on the money. And what you see over there on the oftentimes on warm days when it's just chock-a-block full of kids, it's that we are the gem of many summer day camps and others. So we do work to bring those folks in. At a year like this coming year, where we think there might be limitations on participation, we would probably really frown upon bringing folks in for this year. But I think this is a more long-term discussion, Jerry.
And in addition, the CDC guidance for pools speaks specifically to having the idea to limit staff and patrons to the local area, to the town or to the geographic local area, to discourage any community transmission from area to area.
The only thing that concerns me, I think that's a great idea. We were all over just being a resident only pool. But I think we took some of the very same or similar money for that project as we did with Gould's Landing, which says that I can't close it to non-residents. So I think while I can't close it, I think not advertising it is kind of the flip of that. I feel like I have some guidance, but just because I feel like I have guidance doesn't mean that you're ready to stop talking. So I don't want to end the discussion prematurely.
We all set?
Can I just make a comment in response to Terry's comment about being fiscally conservative? I guess I haven't I'd love to get an understanding from council, because Terry, you said we as a council talk about being fiscally conservative. That's not what I've gathered from from this now being the third meeting of budget review. I have asked a few questions, and I feel that considering where cuts could be made, and none of those have been taken as, yeah, we need to be fiscally conservative about this budget. So I guess why is that popping up now versus any other conversation that we've had so far in reviewing the budget?
I actually,
And I'd love to hear from others, like how are you approaching this? Are you approaching it with a fiscally conservative lens or not?
I take, obviously, we talk about this. This is my third budget, so I'm probably referencing things from typically within the year. I take a lot of guidance from the individuals who are actually presenting. Given COVID was kind of an odd thing, if I get an opportunity to say yes, that like this pool thing is definitely a thing that I would say yes, because it's a drain. It's a thing that just doesn't make money. We lose money. But I also understand that there are certain things that people are connected to that are important to them. So yeah, saying fiscally conservative, I mean, we do this, but simply because I didn't, or people didn't agree to what your recommendations was. I don't think that that's is exactly where we're at. I just wanted to kind of make sure that this, particularly for me, the pool is a big drain. So that's what I meant.
And I'm not fiscally conservative at all, Laura. So I'm all about community. I want the kids to have fun this summer. That's where I am.
I mean, I guess we do as like, I guess I'm not sure in this process where we really define, are we looking to slice and dice, or are we not? Like, and I'm not sure. Like, I've been jotting down notes each session where I think we could make cuts, but I don't see that as being the perspective of where the council is going. So I'm a little bit confused when or how that happens, or whether as a council we say, or maybe we disagree, that we're going to come out of this way over budget and we're raising taxes. So like where in the process do we shake out on this stuff?
Laura, I think there are two ways we shake out on it. I think we have historically, as we've gone through different budgets, made some decisions to reduce requests. But I think more often it's been at the end in the wrap up when we look at where we are with the tax rate, where we are with the increase in budget. Then we've often looked at making some adjustments.
So
I specifically said when we were talking about the additional person in public works, that's an issue I want to come back to.
Yeah.
So I absolutely loathe to disagree with Council Chair Perry, especially at all, let alone on camera. But my perspective is a little bit different. I am at an absolute loss this year. Staff put together a budget that reflects restoring services. And as we've gone through each thing, I have walked away with a question mark around a shared labor position, but that's it. And I am not used to getting this far into the budget without having some discussion. When we've made adjustments in the past, it always feels like they're identified and I can kind of move with you. But when we get to the third, if suddenly we're going through the budget to make adjustments on every department, there are so many things that are linked together that will take time to kind of work through. So I will tell you from my perspective, this budget, I feel like I am blindfolded and have a really good pair of beats on right now.
And I would just add that, I think that the process as I've experienced it now for, this is my 4th year in budget season, is, we bring up the thing like Tom mentioned, we bring up the items where we think, I don't know, I could be convinced either way. I want to look at it. I mean, I feel that way about the pool, or opening versus not opening, or opening at reduced staffing and reduced patronage versus regular. Like, there are these items that we flag and we do return to them, as we try to wrap up. But then each counselor brings their own personal perspective to the process in terms of what they think. I've been very vocal every year that I do not believe that we have enough resources in this town to fund the level of services that the people who live in this town want. And these are good services that they should want. But it's not helpful when folks direct all of that attention at the municipal government, because the reason that we don't have the funds to fund the budget that the people want for the services they want doesn't have a lot to do with how the town of Orono operates or its budget. So my feeling every year has been, I don't want to pay more taxes. I don't want to raise taxes, and I don't want someone to yell at me about it while I'm getting a cup of coffee in the morning or walking down the street with my dog. If the taxes have to be raised at a certain point, people might get mad enough to direct their attention elsewhere where they might have more luck in gaining more revenue for the town. But that's my personal political perspective. And at the end of the budget season, I am happy to look at certain items and say, well, I would add it, but you're also complaining that the tax rate is too high, and you do have a point. So I guess we'll cut that service, or we'll reduce that service, because we have to find a balance. But so I would say that, everyone's bringing their own unique perspective to it. And, I think you're hearing from Terry, for example, that he is coming at it with kind of more of a fiscally conservative lens. Everybody has their own way of approaching it. But as a group, I mean, we typically have, flagged items and then return back to them towards the end of the budget.
So Jeff, I'd love to hear from you too, but like, Sophie, what are the items that we've collectively flagged then? Because there are some items that I brought up that I don't think were flagged, and I didn't bring up other items because then it felt like, okay, now's not the time. So I know that shared position and the pool, and is there anything else? And we're talking about more than $1 million. So like that.
So we're talking about
800,000. Okay.
897,000 right now.
Okay.
And from my perspective, I write it down. If somebody says it and I see nodding head, or there's like discussion that moves it forward to as flagging. And those are the only two that I have flagged at this point.
Jeff, do you have a perspective as far as how you're approaching this?
Well, I've been a little, okay, so this is my first year, like your first year, and I've been a little bit reluctant to be the squeaky wheel. So maybe there's a little self-censorship going on there, because there are a few items in some of the other budgets that we've discussed that I sort of thought, well, the process is we hear from the staff as experts, and then we have some deliberative time later on. But maybe I'm mistaking that process, and this is our deliberative time, and I shouldn't expect to get another crack at it. So Sophie is wincing.
Well, I think number one, this would be so much easier if we were all sitting around a table. But I go to staff put in a ton of time to give you a lot of material, that the things that you're seeing in these presentations are really designed more for the public than they are for council to frame a discussion. The goal in my head, and maybe I'm failing, is to spearhead or to kick off a council discussion about what's the service level, and where do you want to see things change, whether it's up or down. So yeah, I guess I kind of thought I was supporting a council discussion now, not giving you all the information, because I'm skipping big, huge swaths of information.
Can I use an example of where it gets a little confusing to me when you use the word service level? Like I looked at the Public Works thing last week or whenever, and the 2013 blower that might be small, we could buy the new blower for 10 grand versus spending 90. And I asked Rob, how many years are we going to get out of that 10 grand investment into this machine, even if it's not ideal? And he said, you know, maybe 4-ish, whatever, 3, whatever, still cheaper than 90.
Yeah.
To me, that's not a service level question. That's like a detail, like budget, like line item thing, because to me, that's a no brainer. Like we're not spending like we have 900 grand to cut. We're not spending the 90 grand. We're spending 10 this year. So like, when or how do we have that type of conversation? And it's fine if everybody disagrees with me and says, no, we need the big machine now. Like, and I'll get voted out, like whatever. Like, to me, that's where I actually think of myself as being fiscally conservative, but I feel like there hasn't been an opportunity to have those conversations.
So I would just say, since you bring up service level question there, when staff is constantly being pushed to do sidewalks faster and better by both the community and at times, maybe not this council, but council, and the question comes up, how can we use our limited staffing resources and get things done better? That whacker is a service level question, because we continue to use it. It's going to be the same slow machine it is now, and we are using it for more than it is sized for. So it is going to not have the same lifespan as it would otherwise have. Now, having said that, Laura, I am not arguing for council to buy the whacker. That is a council decision. That is not a staff decision.
See, I'm blown away by the level of sidewalk clearing and attention in Orono. Like, I think, bar none, better than anything I've seen anywhere in the region. And I've lived in all those places. And so there's nothing more that I think we need to be delivering in that area. So anyway, I'll shut up. I don't need to be monopolizing the thing, but like, I guess my point is, I think there are areas that we can cut without making huge issues. And so that was one in Public Works. There was that 2009 pickup that can be inspected in Public Works. And like, I can go back through my notes for other departments. So the pool, I don't think we can just cut this year. So that's a few things on my list for
the only other thing
consideration.
that didn't really come up, Laura, to answer kind of your question in a broader way is like, I know you've referenced that $800,000 number a lot. And I would also say that, for example, last year when we began the budget process, it became very clear very quickly that the majority of council was invested in attempting to not raise the tax level, the municipal tax at all, like as close to not raising it as possible. And the whole budget process became, how do we get to this particular number, or at least in the ballpark of this particular number? We really haven't, and every previous tax season, there was often a ballpark number out there. Like usually Tom would mention, I'd really like to see this at X number of cents, like I'd really like to see this many mills. And then staff would present options that would get us closer to that ballpark. We haven't had that conversation this year. And I think that a really big reason why I'm guessing that we haven't had that conversation is we drastically reduced our services because of a pandemic. And we knew when we did that we were going to have to pay for it later. And so this year has become more about restoring things to what they were. And so we haven't had that same conversation around, are we trying to hit a target number? And I think that's tying staff's hands a bit, or possibly making it murkier and more confusing for them. Am I right, Sophie?
I guess I'm confused. The 800 grand is just like on top. Like it's not like we were at 28, we went to 25, and now we're like it's just going up, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that the context is that last year, we lost value, and in order to bring the municipal side in at 0 increase on the mill rate, which was council's target, we actually had to cut $400,000 out of the budget. So the budget that we passed last year was $400,000 less than the 2020 budget. And then the year before that, when we got an increase in revenue sharing, council wanted to pass along tax relief. So the budget that went through was $336,000 less than the year before. So I think that's part of which caused us, in order to get there, we were stretching our infrastructure budgets. And I mean, that's why we are where we are.
And
So-
at the state level, there was revenue sharing that was up for grabs. I mean, that was you couldn't determine. There's all kinds of, and right now we've got the American Rescue Plan. I mean, there's things that are coming at us still. I think that, when we get to the end and when we finally figure out how much revenue we have, then we can make different decisions or keep the same ones, the decisions that we've been making. But there's just a lot of movement, it feels like, at the legislative levels.
I think would be helpful before long to see another budget summary sheet. I know we've talked about that, to reflect what the current best thinking on revenue sharing is, to reflect where the school department's request is based on their increased state aid. I think that might give us some better indication of where we might end up. I have not personally been happy with the amount of increase, both in the total budget and in the projected mill rate when we got started. So I probably should have spoken up more about areas that I think we might want to look at, but the budget's not over and we can still talk about them. But I think we need to get through the what we have on our plate tonight too.
Tom, would it make sense if people have ideas that they have not yet shared? If I could just get a sense of those, it will help me. And so could people maybe email or text me maybe email, don't text. They're just in general, not like a big long thing, but just in general, what are the areas they want to kind of go back to?
I think it's a good idea. And I'd like to have that shared with all counselors.
How about I'll make a list and get it back out with those summary sheets. We don't meet for budget again until the 24th. So that gives me a little bit of time to breathe.
Good.
Okay. So you ready to continue on? Because pool concerns is not the end of my presentation.
Let's go.
So let's talk about the constraints in Parks and Rec. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is going to be facilities. We don't have places to be inside. And Mitch and Tom and I have spoken with the school. We're hoping to open up some of that, but it's still, especially for winter activities, and if you're going to run after school activities and it's a rainy day, it's really hard to do rain on a different day because parents have a hard time. You got to shift and now you have kids you got to take care of. So facilities continues to be probably our largest issue. Funding. I have an interesting slide to show you. Whoops. Funding is another issue. the Parks and Recreation, as revenue sharing was eroded, Parks and Rec took the lion's share of the hit, Parks and Rec and infrastructure. The participant pool, and I don't mean like swimming, I mean the number of people who are available to have programs. So our lack of indoor space for recreation, it for our programming limits the programming opportunities that we have. So I want just to look at a comparison. And the reason I throw these 3 towns out there is because I hear, I want to be like, well, this town does that. Well, Brewer does this. Well, Hamden does this. Well, Old Town does this. I want you to just look at the comparisons in the budget. And I realize, for example, part of Hamden's bill and Brewer's bill is associated with operating their building, but we don't have a building. So just, this is kind of just as you compare, just keep in mind the budgets. The other thing that we are constrained by is the population. And so if you look, because we're compared a lot to Old Town, and you look at the number, the light blue is the number of 5-year-olds and to 14-year-olds. This is Kyle's census data. And the dark blue is 5 to 9. And what you'll see is that Orono and Hamden have relatively small population compared to the rest of them. And I just want to go back to look at the difference in the budget. We've got the same population, big difference in the budget. And I'm sorry if I don't want to make you sick going back and forth, but I think part of the reason that this is important is a lot of times in order to make programs not only viable in terms of make enough money, because I think everybody agrees that public services are not necessarily all going to be self-sustaining, but viable too in terms of a good quality program for a kiddo to participate in. You got to have enough people to show up. Having a soccer team that you can't field a whole team for is not the same experience as other folks might have had when they were here, where we had multiple teams, which is what gets me to my, whoops, I'm going backwards. Don't mean to do that. Sorry. So this is Orono's population. And from the 70s to 2019, the blue are 5 to 9-year-olds, and the orange is 5 to 14-year-olds. And so when people in the 80s and 90s want the same programs to have those same programs in 2019, see what's happening with our population. We are losing that youth population. So when we think about, for example, basketball, even if we get beyond the space constraint, and I want to run a rec basketball program, if I start peeling off opportunities for people to do specialized basketball, travel basketball, other types of basketball, I am further eroding the numbers, which make it more difficult for me to provide a decent program in terms of you show up for a basketball game and there are only 5 of you on the team, or you got to borrow members from the other team to make a full team. I think that becomes an issue. So I think that pool is an issue, which is what has caused us to think about how we add programming in. And instead of thinking we're going to get 20 to 30 kids for youth programming, we're thinking now if we have 6 to 8 or 10, we're doing very well. So it causes us to have to scale things a little bit differently. Yes, ma'am. Oh, you're on mute.
Can I just, Oh, wait, I'm not still on mute. Yeah. So this to me so clearly ties to the housing that we have in our community. If the vast majority, dare I say almost 50%, is rental housing for students, we are not going to have a growing family youth population in this community. And this directly speaks to why I think that rental regulation is the issue of critical importance for this community's sustainability over the long term. And I'll just end there because I've said it before, but that just perfectly highlights the problem.
All right. So, capital investment. I want to make it clear, in case it's not, that staff puts things in the budget based on what it perceives the expectation for service level to be. The ice rink is one of those things. So we have an ice rink. It doesn't have a refrigeration system. It really hasn't had a ton of renovation in all of the years. My beloved husband used to work at the ice rink when he was in college up here. And it looks about the same with 30 years of weathering. Right now, there is an expectation that when it's cold out, we're going to have ice to skate on. So based on that expectation, I can't do that in the condition that the rink is currently in. I can't just pop a liner in the rink based on the way it was built. And the climate fluctuations are making it very, very difficult to keep ice there. The other issue, I think Rob Yerxa brought it up, that when he was a kid, if you could skate across it, it was awesome. And now there's a service level expectation that it's going to be flat and easy to skate on. The other issue that we run into is the way we're getting those freeze thaw. We saw it very clearly on the pop-up ice rink. It warms up on the bottom. You go to step on it and all the water gushes up around the edges. On the big ice rink, that becomes even more problematic, and Mitch has a whole lot more experience than I do with this. But Rob, this is Rob Yerxa's back of the envelope on a kind of do-it-yourself with design with some assistance, contracted assistance to make it happen, to level out the rink and to bring it back up. Mitch?
And to pave it. So ultimately fixing the underground so that you could pave it, so that it would not lose water out the bottom. I think the piece to this would be that it would be easier to maintain the ice. The challenge with an ice rink is that you're at Mother Nature's mercy. There is no magic wand to making ice. There is no magic bullet to making it all perfect. The challenge with this is that even with this renovation, it doesn't necessarily mean that there will be ice all the time. And that's one of the biggest challenges with the ice rink, is that right now we struggle because it was built a long time ago. There is water that leaks out the bottom because it's ground. It's not like anything else. The actual ice insulates the ground, so the ground is warmer than the ice and it melts out the bottom. So all that stuff causes challenges. But what I will say is that we've done very well with the ice rink, and I think this would make it easier to put. We might not have to put as much water down at the beginning to build it up with it level. It will stay in there longer. But at the same time, the key to having ice for a long period of time is building a mass. And ice rinks are very difficult because there's, like I said, there's no magic way to do this. And I'll leave it by saying this. This past winter, the NHL decided to have a outdoor game in Lake Tahoe. They had a multi-million-dollar refrigerated outdoor system. About, I don't know, 20 minutes into the game, they had to postpone it until like 10 o'clock at night because the ice was melting because of the sun with a refrigerated system. So it's very difficult. And I think the fluctuation in temperatures and all that. The other piece that I would leave you with this is that I did a little research today, and Minneapolis has 25 ice rinks. All those ice rinks were closed at March 1st this year. And I believe ours, we were skating on a couple weeks into March this year. So I feel pretty good about that piece of it. But I think the challenge is that there is no perfect way to do this. And certainly paving it would allow us to keep the ice easier, the water in there better. But it's still, you're still at the mercy of Mother Nature.
I will pick on this one. Given the variations in climate, I would be hard pressed to support spending $73,000 on an ice rink. Other comments, Laura?
So this year, the ice rink was amazing. I will just say, and there were a ton of people using it. There was grown-ups, there was college students, there was little kids. It was great. So is that level of service repeatable? Or are we saying it's $74,000 or we're never having a rink again?
That is not what we are saying at all. What we are saying is that we can do what we can do. You experience what we can do, which is be at the mercy of the weather. We have great volunteers that help us lay down ice. We've got facilities and public works that help us lay down ice. It is not perfect, but what I'm saying is if that's the level that you're comfortable with, then I think it continues to be repeatable. If you're not happy with this level of service, then I'm saying we got to invest $73,000 to try to make it better if we don't want to have to rebuild the whole rink.
Thank you. I'm happy not investing and saying it's a crapshoot and it's not perfect. It's an outdoor rink, but it's awesome.
Good job this year, Mitch.
Is there some consensus around that so that I could make an adjustment to the budget and we'd all feel better?
I'm sensitive.
I agree too. I agree.
Yep.
Megan, yep.
I will just.
Yeah, I'm nodding, but with like, I know my husband, he just harasses me constantly all winter about my decisions regarding the ice rink and my lack of support for it and his ice skating dream. It's good-natured teasing, but I'm going to get a ration of it again next winter, but that's fine. That's a me problem. No, I don't want to spend 70 something.
And our plan at this point is to try to maintain the pop-up ice rink. We really saw having that smaller space and more visible in the community for people to just pop over to it seemed to really be well received. So I think the plan is to kind of keep that one, but I'm happy to take something out of the budget if you're.
And we did a lot of skating over at the Taylor Bait Farm this winter too. So I think a lot of people were on ice skates this winter just to get out of the house. So yeah.
So our other capital investment with regard to Parks and Recreation is the pool roof. And Rob Yerxa doesn't normally get animated, but what he said was he's going to need a new shovel to shovel the asphalt shingles off the pool roof that fall off the pool roof if we don't get a new roof on it. So I think that was his way of saying there's end of useful life and then we got to do something. with this. So that is the estimate that we have for commercial grade roofing and warranties.
Sophie, is metal roofing an option for that?
I don't know, Terry. I will tell you that we have a budget estimate with the new management of Parks and Rec. I'm gonna guess that Rob's probably gonna, not Parks and Rec, facilities. I'm gonna guess that Rob's gonna wanna work with Megan to figure out what would work best. I don't know if, I don't know.
Thank you.
I know the price is now much closer than it was not too many years ago
For metal,
for metal.
Yeah.
Yes, metal was much more expensive in the past, and it's not nearly as different now.
I can tell you that I know in the past in working with Dave and facilities, metal roofs have been his preference moving forward. I'm not positive exactly where he landed with the pool roof.
that,
I think we agree we need a new roof.
yeah. So that is what I have for Parks and Rec. And I think, whoops, I have one more. I'm not sharing right now, right?
Correct.
All right, so my last slide, I'm not going to bother to share it, but you know, one of the things I wanted to discuss is when I first got here, we had some issues with Parks and Recreation where it was somebody wanted to do something, and so we put it under the rec umbrella, and people were doing activities thinking that they had town insurance, because that's why you put it under the rec umbrella. But the way it was managed or not managed, we didn't, if something had happened, they would have found that they were not covered. And so we stripped everything back and we started this process of trying to rebuild, which we started with the UMaine contract, and we're kind of incrementally trying to rebuild. Mitch likened it once, and I liked it, to we put the tree in place. It has a trunk and it has leader limbs, and now it's time to fill it out and put leaves on it and kind of grow. When we started that expansion, that idea of expanding, we hired Megan. That was our first really our first step. And I will say, not only did we do a good job to get another 40 hours into the department, but man, we hired somebody who is definitely a go-getter and creative and is kind of moving us along in a direction that I'm so happy to see. The sky is the limit. But I keep hearing we want to expand more. And I think council is going to have to give staff some direction in what that looks like. I can tell you that the constraints we have right now are more about, it would be great to have another body to do work, to be able to flesh out more time, you know, more programming time. But at the end of the day, without a space to be able to run the programs in, I think we've maxed the number of people that make sense at 2 people in the department. So replacing with the rec programmer. But we had, for example, had a long-standing kind of a understanding with adult education that we were not going to run a lot of adult programming because they did. And instead we would host them in our space when, you know, our smaller spaces when they wanted it. And we would publicize what they were doing. We don't run our own senior programming. We instead have worked with the Gateway Seniors Without Walls and the Housing Foundation to kind of try to work together to not duplicate. I don't know if that's still a place that council wants to go. I heard it at candidates night, I've heard it in discussions that we want more. I guess we need some understanding of what more looks like to council.
Anybody want to jump on that one? Jeff?
Well, I think I've had some of these conversations with Mitch and Sophie in the past. And what I see is that there's a desire for more and diverse programs, multiple ages across the community, but it's not necessarily for long-term sustained programming. I kind of think of it as like pop-up programming. Like, you know, if we had a more nimble registration system that people could access a little bit more easily, then they could jump on and they could request programs that they want, or we could say, sunny weekend projected, we're going to have this kind of paddling program at Brownies Beach, or, you know, that kind of nimbleness, I think, would go a long way to alleviating some of the, you know, the angst in the community that they don't have access to services, and also not put a huge burden on staff if we're using, you know, non-staff facilitators for some of those programs. And I believe that the portal is getting better, right? Our software is getting better for registration, and maybe that's something we could think of in the future.
Good. Laura?
Yeah, I guess I think there's a basis of core programming that needs to occur just historically. It's what's been offered, like soccer, basketball, and like a spring sport of some kind, whether, and maybe it's not baseball, maybe it's track, or there's frisbee right now, whatever. So just have that running and operational. I also think that it's disheartening to arrive at the rec website and not see much for programming, particularly for specific age groups. And so if there's formalized partnerships or relationships that we have with other entities about their programming filling that age group, then I think we need to more effectively market and make it look like it's really kind of shared programming in some way, like we're really marketing it. And so I think that would go a long way to making it look like there was more robust programming. And I heard from a lot of people around the concerns about rec and not enough. And I haven't had the length of exposure to it. I don't think personally. I've been pleased and happy with what I've seen, but I do know that as people talk about what's missing, that I kind of go, oh, okay, I guess that's true in these other communities. So I found the comparison to Hamden really interesting, particularly considering that the population levels were similar. So I think it's figuring out and coming back and showing like what the constant core programming will look like with this new staffing level.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of this that is a marketing or an optics issue, because one of the things, I mean, first of all, we've always had this push and this drive and a very loud voice from a particular demographic that wants like youth-centric programming. But as we've seen in these slides, like that population of people right now, maybe it will get bigger and things will change in the future, but right now that is a very, very small population in our town, but it seems to be a very large focus for a number of people, and that's completely understandable. But we're having this conversation about not duplicating services, which is very important. And even the example, you know, that Jeff brought up about paddling, like we have the Orono Paddlers Club, like we've got the university, we've got the Paddlers Club, we've got adult education, we have elders services and programming, like these things that are in our community and what make it so rich. It's not a good use of the town's resources to duplicate that programming to any great extent. But I agree with Laura that I think it would be better to have it clearly kind of all of these things that are available as resources inside our community, even if they're not offered by Parks and Rec or under the umbrella of that department, that is, if someone goes to the Parks and Rec website, that they understand that all these other things exist in our community, or there's some way we can communicate that better. For me, and I've been vocal about this for years now, I think that the central mission of this Parks and Rec department, with the budget that we can afford for it, based on the demographics of our town, that the primary central drive of this department should be passive recreation for economic development. I think that that is where we use our resources best and leverage them best, because there is a lot of programming for active programming for all ages in this community. And are there spots we could fill in? Absolutely. And I'd love to look at those. But in terms of going back to the Parks and Recs department of the 1970s and 80s, that's totally unrealistic. It's totally unrealistic. And our partnerships with like UMaine, that program is smart because it leverages something that is in our community and we don't have the assets or the resources to do ourselves. And I really believe that we should be focusing on passive recreation and economic development, and that will have a beneficial effect on our town as a whole.
Comments? Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, as we think about kind of entwining some of the other activities together, I actually don't mind the software system that Parks and Rec does, and I didn't realize that maybe being a limit that Jeff is describing. So I would need to understand that more. I'm familiar with it because it's what every town around here uses, that software system. But is there a way to potentially use that software system as a registration system for some other leagues and youth activities that are run by other organizations? I mean, maybe there's even some fundraising possible through it, but whether it's Little League or whether it's any other kind of programming that requires that same audience, and can we provide support in that way without owning it? And it addresses the optics issue and kind of, I don't know, just an idea.
So the answer is yes to that. We can set up programs for theoretically anybody. I mean, I don't think we'd want to do it for just anybody. The only thing they would need, if it's going to run through our programs, I think we just want to make sure that we're compliant with EEOC and some other things, which some groups have had some difficulty in the past with. But I think that is doable. So your discussion about optics is not lost, and I don't know when you last went on the Parks and Rec website, and I am not suggesting at all that it is done, because it's not. But you can begin to see the direction that we are heading in. We have been working to make some changes. We just have staff that's kind of tapped out right now, but we're working at it.
And that continues to always be my concern when we do these things, and I get the service levels that we always expect. But typically for me personally, I always go back to our staff and not burdening them and overworking them. So as we navigate this stuff, I like how this is where this is going in the sense of like working with everybody else, because like I said, we've got great staff, but we tend to have an issue with pushing them a little too far until they're burnt out. So as we go through this, to keep that in mind is one of my things I want to look at.
Well, some good comments. Thank you for those. Anything else for this evening? We meet again, or some of us meet again Thursday.
Yes, we have a community development discussion. I have to get a finalized agenda out tomorrow morning, so we'll get. I don't think there will be tons of pages of paperwork for you, so it will probably be one of those. Call if you'd like a packet, either to pick one up or to have it delivered. And then we meet again for budget on the 24th. My thought, given where we are with budget, is that I would just print out the financial reports, and if people had questions or concerns, they could bring them up at the end of the meeting.
Great.
Would that work for you, Tom?
Yep.
I think that's it. I think that's it.
We have an assignment to get back to Sophie in a reasonably short order. Any suggestions we want to look at for cost savings? We all set? Then we'll call it a night. Thank you all.